Thank you for joining, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome. I'm Matt, the founder of Phormulate. We've created a platform called patientgroups.ai, which is dedicated to helping patients connect with the right patient groups early in their diagnosis. And today's discussion is particularly close to our mission. We're exploring the immense value of early patient engagement, which is crucial for ensuring that patients and their caregivers have the best possible support and resources. We'll delve into strategies for effective patient outreach, discuss the integration of mental and physical health, and consider the best ways to support families throughout the healthcare process. We are very lucky to have a panel of distinguished experts who will share their insights and experiences on these topics. I'm excited to lead this discussion and hope you'll find it enlightening and actionable. Firstly, I wanted to bring on the panel. So maybe, Naomi, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you for having me. So my name's Naomi, and I'm the Director of Patient Advocacy at Barnacle EMAS, which is a CRO, a clinical or contract research organisation. My role in Barnacle is to ensure the patient voice. What's the voice? Well, it's the perspectives, experiences and preferences of patients, caregivers and families is incorporated into the design and delivery of our clinical trials and early access programs. Hi, Carol. And where we can, obviously it's not all possible, but where we can to reduce patient and family and caregiver burden and co-create with the patient communities that is taking part in the clinical trials and early access programs. My background is paediatric clinical research nursing, so I've had the privilege of administering investigational medicines and caring for many patients and families. So I'm delighted to be here alongside the panel, and any questions, please let me know. So thanks so much for having me.
Fantastic. Welcome, Naomi. And Tori, maybe you can introduce yourself as well.
Yes, hello everyone. And thank you for having me, Matt and Julie. It's great to be here. As Naomi was saying, it's great to be with you as well, and you, Rohit. So I guess, first of all, I am a person with an epilepsy. I have had epilepsy possibly all my life, but only diagnosed age 10. And I realised after having refractory epilepsy for decades and then having a temporal lobectomy, so a type of brain operation for my epilepsy, along with the all too common and sometimes even more impactful psychiatric side of the epilepsy. So I ended up in psychiatric hospital, and it was only after all this that I realised I'm a bit strange for being open about my epilepsy. This is not a normal thing amongst people. So I decided to try and empower other people affected by the epilepsies through education, and for them seeing or getting to see this is pretty cool stuff, the research that's going on behind the scenes, and it's a positive thing to take your mind off the awfulness of an epilepsy, whether it's controlled or not. And that turned into Epilepsy Sparks, which is an organisation to help bridge the gap between clinicians, researchers and patients and families. And to give people realistic hope for the future and the next generation. And every week on a Thursday, my podcast, Epilepsy Sparks Insights, is released. I've had some marvellous guests, such as Rohit Shankar, who you will hear from shortly, and other clinicians and researchers from around the world, because it's actually quite a big party of people working to improve the lives of these people, but most people have no idea. And indeed, lots of clinicians and researchers don't have any idea of each other because they're so overwhelmed and so much work to do. So it's all fun stuff. And yeah, I'm here talking at companies, pharma companies, medtech companies, and it's all really fun stuff. And just back to myself, I still have a refractory epilepsy, but it's heaps better than it used to be due to several factors, including the surgery. And I still have mental health treatment and care. And there's one of the key messages I try to put forth for people with an epilepsy too, and carers and clinicians, is that just because you can't see it, it doesn't mean something's not going on behind the scenes. And we need to have epileptologists, neurologists who don't just look at seizures, but indeed look at other things such as psychiatric health, which is all part of it, movement disorders, the autism, etc. It's all jumbled up together, and we need to be looked after as an individual. All these things together, basically. It's all one.
Thanks, Tori, and welcome.
Thank you.
And Rohit, could you give a bit of an introduction to yourself and a background?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me on the panel. Well, the easiest way to put me in this thing is that I'm on the other side of the desk to Tori. So I'm a professor in neuropsychiatry, and I tend to so-called specialize into neurodevelopmental psychiatry and epilepsy. And generally, the way we would like to sort of describe my role is that I run something called CIDA with the University of Plymouth and the NHS. And that stands for Cornwall Intellectual Disability Equitable Research. So our work goes into understanding precision medicine and personalized medicine in the neurodevelopmental population. And we look into aspects of genetics, big data, then issues with regard to digital apps and technology, and of course, medication. But central to all that is patients, and especially vulnerable patients and their decision making and how to engage them. And it's great to have a whole forum to actually talk about it here. And I'm also a jobbing clinician. Half my salary is paid as consultant and clinical director for the Cornwall Intellectual Disability and Autism Services. So that's my sort of two hats.
Fantastic. Yeah, you're probably the busiest man on earth at the moment. So thank you very much for joining. So yeah, appreciate it a lot. So today we're gonna discuss all those points and go through it. But we have a kind of topic on the docket, the impact of early patient engagement. So what I wanted to do, Naomi, is could you start us off sharing how early patient engagement has shaped clinical trials within the organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. I think the first thing to say is it's never too early. And I think it can often be too late in many scenarios. So when we engage with pharma companies, if it's, right in the inception phase, thinking about when to start, it's never too early. It's really taking a step back and understanding the patient community that you're working with, the history and the background that this patient community have been through. So there might have been historical clinical trials that have approved medicines, or there might have been clinical trials and early access programs that have sadly failed, and often in rare there is no alternative. So it's just really important that you understand that, and that you're having these timely conversations, that you understand when designing and delivering a clinical trial or an early access program, that you have all that information. We've done a lot of steering committees and focus groups, find them really insightful and fascinating, and can be quite informative right from the start. Sometimes we do healthcare professional and patient engagement ones separately and then bring people together. I think that's quite helpful. Sometimes they have different objectives and views, and sometimes they're all aligned, and sometimes that can take a little bit of a time to have that alignment. So I think it's important to have that in the timeline of when you're going to start your clinical trial, and that again is communicated, and that you've got a clear strategy of patient engagement and a communication plan. And then again, that you're looking at equitable voices, so you're not just having, say, one patient group from one area or one country. We try and get a few different ones from, say, Europe and, say, the US and other parts of the world, so that we have more of a variation and equitable voice. And then again, it's really important, it's something I'm very passionate about, is that everyone gets reimbursed for their time, and ensuring that you have that fair market value tool. I don't know who made that up, but that you're checking that it's the correct amount, that you are able to reimburse these patients and families and often volunteers for their time, and that it's equitable, that it's the same for say Europe, the US, UK, wherever they are, and that again, if you're having healthcare professional engagement at the beginning, that they are reimbursed the same. I think healthcare professionals and patient experts and advocates should be reimbursed the same. So yeah, and that you're addressing all of the strategy and then protocols, and that you're mapping out how long these things will take, because often reviewing of information sheets and informed consent forms and things like that can take a long time. So it's giving enough time to the patient groups to review, and being realistic and transparent about how you're going to incorporate their feedback, because often if it's just a review and maybe seen more of a tick box exercise, then that can be quite frustrating. So I think that best practice would be to co-create the protocol and the information sheets and the patient information sheets with the patient groups and the healthcare professionals. And if you're co-creating from the beginning and doing it all together, then there won't be this rush to review and then incorporate changes, and it will save ultimately a lot of resources, time and money, if you're co-creating it with the community of who it's intended for. Is that a good start?
That's a fantastic start. That's very appreciate that. Tori, from your perspective as a patient group leader and a patient, what changes when you're involved early in these processes?
First of all, we feel respected more. So it's obvious to us when we're plonked in at the last minute to tick a box, and it's just a bit of a game, really. It's clear to us, we as patient service users, we have lots of opportunities to be involved in different research, and we can see the good from the not so good, and we'll choose, of course, the good. And actually, good includes being paid for your work. Still, unfortunately, there is a distinct trend for patients just, well, darling, you're just a patient, and you're not important. That's basically what it says to us when we are not paid for our work. So that's a big issue and something I'm kind of fighting for. But I think everyone here on this table is like, we appreciate the people who are involved. Of course, like, our target market is going to be patients or families, so we have to get proper insight from day one regarding that. And I have a really good example, actually. I'm involved with University in Toronto at the moment, and we have a 6-year epilepsy study involving, it's actually about epilepsy, Alzheimer's, other forms of dementia, and one other thing, neurological diseases. And we have been involved from day one with the researchers and clinicians. And it's a bit kind of seen as a bit scary for all people, or most people, because oh my God, what are we doing? This is a long project. What's going on? But it's actually exciting for us all. And we are helping, we being the patient group, we're helping to actually direct the researchers and maybe have them even like edit what their potential goals were, because they can see things from the perspective of the service user. So it benefits them like that. It benefits us because it makes us feel that, we're contributing to another generation of people. We even have somebody, this is a brilliant example of how diverse patient groups ideally are. We have somebody in our group who has dementia. She's had it for 8-10 years, and but it's wonderful to talk to. You would never guess she has a form of dementia, which is something I often experience with people. Oh, you don't look like you have an epilepsy. You don't look like you've been in psych hospital before. What's going on? So we have this brilliant, diverse group of people and we are communicating directly with the clinicians and with the researchers to help mold their research into something that will actually be useful for the Homo sapiens of the future. So it's good for all parties, really. We don't know what the future holds, but it's going to be positive. We're going to challenge each other, and we're all going to learn together. And actually, one more thing we found, and I was aware of this, but I think most patients have not been necessarily aware of, is that lots of people, if they haven't been involved, people being clinicians, researchers, if they haven't been involved in patient groups before, it can be a bit scary. On their side, they don't know what to say, don't want to say the wrong thing. They can sometimes even feel a little bit intimidated. So, or anti-patient group, maybe based on past experiences. So we have to kind of, and we're trying to do that, is break those, those things dividing us down, those walls down, so that we can actually be effective and work together. And it's totally possible.
Yeah, it seems to me that the kind of bringing in the patients early can help you drive the sort of process in a much more efficient way and not have that barrier that each individual Homo sapien, as you mentioned, brings forward, because we're all different, and it doesn't necessarily mean one process can fit every single person. But so thank you for that. I appreciate that. And on that point, Rohit, the mental health piece often goes unaddressed in discussions regarding this kind of neurological, mental, and physical health part. Why are they classified as separate types of conditions, and what could be done to kind of integrate mental health more thoroughly in this process?
So, Matt, before I get to that, can I just sort of also bookend the excellent conversation which Naomi and Tori had? You see, one of the big challenges, if you think about it, take epilepsy, because Tori's there with lived experience. Epilepsy, we have got 34 molecules, including a lot of new molecules. However, the number of people who are treatment resistant has still remained the same. It's around 30%. And my own recent study recently showed 26.6%. The second thing is compliance with anti-seizure medication has still remained the same. So even the 30% are there, and we know that a significant chunk, if they take their medication, it can improve. We know that only around 58 to 60% take their medication regularly. Now, the question is why? Now, this why has a lot of hypotheses. So the first thing which you have to unpack here is the RCT. RCT is the gold standard. It is, of course, fundamental. However, for any molecule, but it's almost like you're selecting Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie to represent of that condition, to represent them. So what you're having is basically healthy volunteers, usually young, with that condition being selected. How are they representative of the population? Actually, there is a study which showed that only 5% of any condition's population would be eligible for an RCT. They would all get ruled out otherwise. So which means that whoever is representing there in that condition is not representing me in that state, which means they are already on the back foot right there. So if you are expecting me to be Brad Pitt, well, I would prefer Harrison Ford, but never mind. I mean, at the end of the day, it's something which is really tight and difficult. Now you take that. So basically, we need a bottom-up structure. Yes, RCTs are important, but you need to involve people to ensure that there is engagement across around complex morbidity. Now let's go to the mental health question which you landed there. Mental health, usually if you look at the studies which are there, they focus on symptoms. Symptoms do not make the disorder by itself. And we use scales, screening scales. So depression scored on Glasgow Depression Scale or whatever, this thing 15, 18, and this thing usually targeting mild to moderate depression or this thing. And then we try to apply that same philosophy and the learning to the general population, which tends to be much more heterogeneous with social confounders, alcohol drinking, work stresses, basically not interested in taking medication or stigma issues. And we're trying to unpack it. So we are trying to, if you think of marketing, I think the health sector is one of the worst in marketing. You don't get somebody making a new cola, start off by making the cola and say, yeah, here's the product. Now let's try whether you like it or not. You usually go to the seller, which they do, which is there. So basically, if I'm the guy who's actually the shop owner or something, the clinician, yes, you contact that, but also the end customer. The end customer has to be brought in very early, bottom up into this. And mental health, physical health, it's all health.
Yep.
And I sort of divide it into three states, basically. It's well-being. So we want to preserve well-being and we want to prevent ill states. Then there is basically the state where you're not brilliant, but you tick along. So you got up and down and you're not perfect. You're sort of chugging along. And then the third one is the disease state. We have to separate these three states from each other. And that's the best way to do things and not actually sort of bring it down into mental health and physical health. Of course, you need some sort of separation and some sort of cubicles to start bringing in molecules and things. And we need some sort of science to help develop that. But that science needs to be co-produced and co-discovered. And I think that is happening to a degree now. So it's like diabetes. I'm Southeast Asian, rice eating, much more pronounced in diabetes is much more pronounced in Southeast Asians. You don't leave a chunk of diabetic patients of ethnic minority saying that, okay, we don't want you don't fit into the mold, because that's where the impact is. You want them and you want proportionate representation. Same thing with mental health or this thing. You need that representation and that sampling, stratified sampling, which needs to come in, and possibly things like generational AI and machine learning can help. Anyway, I can go on waffling. That I think that sort of gives
very
you
interesting. Like you mentioned at the beginning, it's about the big data, and you've only got a very small section of population with a particular thought, a particular mental health, like you mentioned, and a physical health, which is okay, except this particular condition they've got. That's not very helpful. You need a very wide, broad range of people to get that big data through. So it kind of completely makes sense. Yeah.
Interestingly, Tori would never get selected into any trial, either psychiatrically or in epilepsy, because of the issue that she sort of has symptoms or has had history of both or anything. So sorry, Tori, you wouldn't be in any of the proper studies.
Well,
that's
exactly.
the problem. But is it proper though?
Exactly, and you get caught between a rock and a hard place. And I brought this up in my therapy like this week. You look okay, you sound okay. People don't see you have tonic-clonic seizures. You're not going out, I'm not going into, psychosis anytime soon, fingers crossed. And therefore, you are okay. And then backing up what you were saying as well, Rohit, we have, you look into patient groups. I tell you what, I come across the same people again and again and again. For almost everyone, their first language is English. Most people are white. Most people you see them all over social media anyway. They are easier to access. Most of them don't have intellectual disability or are not on the autism spectrum. Most of them don't have movement disorders. I was in a study, actually two studies, and I said to everyone, look, we're all a little bit pale around this table. What's going on? We're talking about EEGs here. What's it like to put what's it like to do an EEG for someone with afro hair? And the looks on their faces were like, just hadn't thought of it. And it wasn't being, it wasn't that they were being anti anyone. It was just that they didn't have that knowledge. And I also, you made me think of this talk I did in Denmark. We've got another conference coming up in a week and a half. You should be there, the DICE conference. And it was a brilliant one, actually, because we had about half of us were clinicians and half of us were patients and families. And I did a talk about the mental health side of the epilepsies and things like digestive issues. I mentioned constipation. I mentioned what it could feel like to have a seizure. And the parents, some of them were, I didn't intend for this to happen, but were in tears because they said, I didn't realize that this is kind of, know what my child might have gone through. That some of them were children, some of them were adults. And so I think it's really important that we manage somehow to give a voice to the people who are nonverbal, who might have serious intellectual disabilities. They need to be involved in these studies because not just because they deserve it, but because they have a higher likelihood of actually having an epilepsy as well. So we need to bring these people in and bring in also the clinicians who are experienced in this, like Rohit, and we should be fighting the fight for everybody affected by the epilepsies and what goes with it. And actually also backing, sorry, I could go on forever, but we always see when it comes to psychiatric disease, okay, it's just anxiety and depression. Don't get me wrong, like they can be overwhelming and destroy people's lives, literally, but people are scared to talk about suicidal ideation, attempts. These are way more common in the population. Nobody will talk about it. And you think, like, what is, why are we doing this if people are going to be dead anyway? It's like, this is a key issue for people. And again, the psychosis that I mentioned, post-ictal psychosis, or everything that goes through it. And I think we had a conversation a while back, Rohit, and you're talking about the if I remember correctly, relatively frequently have to put patients on antipsychotics. And like, how do we prevent that from happening? How do we not dope people up to try and stop symptoms, because we have to think about quality of life and think, what is causing this? How can we prevent symptoms to prevent drugs that dope them up and destroy quality of life? Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Actually, Tori, on that point, from your position as a patient advocate, how would you improve that? What would you do? You know, I mean, there's a list of 100 things I know, but what would be the 1 or 2 things that you would do to improve it?
We need to have more calls like this and share people who actually are able to show their personality in groups and encourage education of all parties. We need to have clinicians be able to say, actually, I have no idea. Okay, let me learn about this, and let them know you don't have to be scared. We want to educate you. We need to encourage people to be researchers to be open and say, do you know what? I want people to be involved who are nonverbal. I want people from the Black community to be involved, or the Asian community. I want people who are, whatever it might be. Are you vegetarian? Are you, we can ask for instance, females, biological females, to be involved in research if we're looking for the impact of, say, sodium valproate on potential children. We need to be able to reach out to other groups of people. And, like, for instance, going back to people with Afro hair, I reached out on Twitter as a patient saying, yo, have we got anybody here who has really curly hair? Actually, you could be, I don't know, stereotypical ginger, have curly hair. We need you involved. And people came out and said, I want to be involved in this. We have to ask that question. And I think sometimes we can do that through patients who are already involved, that we can maybe be a bit blunter and just say, yo, could you please be involved in this? But another thing I think, and I'm not sure, we might have slightly touched on this, but is we need to get families on board too. A bit like when taking medications, often it's, in my experience, it's not necessarily the patient who said, I'm not going to take it, but the family say, no, you're not taking that drug. And it can be you could be similar when it comes to research and getting people involved. So we often have to bring in the people who surround the person that we want to get involved in the research too. But make it cool, and don't just make it scary. Oh my goodness, you're going to be analysed in a lab or something like that, or, oh wow, you're a minority and therefore let's get you involved. How about it's actually, we need people from your group to be involved. How cool is this? And you're going to have a brilliant impact on the world. I think tone is a huge thing, and it's not that difficult to do either. Well, actually, the sciences are exciting.
Yeah, I mean, in the point of making it cool or making the communication better, let's say, Rohit, how have you sort of adapted the communication styles or techniques to, bring on those with the different learning disabilities or visual impairment? How do you do that from your side?
So I think it sort of has to be based on the group that you want to work with. So obviously, if it is somebody with intellectual disability, we break it down into 2 groups. So those who have mild intellectual disability, that's the population which 85% of people with intellectual disability have mild intellectual disability. Now that can be supported with the right speech and language therapists, communication specialists, make the right videos, put together. Recently, we did, we have a grant which is about looking at long-term EEGs and putting it subcutaneously behind people's ears. And we brought in people with intellectual disability, the mild intellectual disability. The surgeon brought a kit and showed it how it's going to go, how the surgery is going to happen. It takes time, it takes effort. And what we empower people with is to say, give them a red card and say, I don't understand. It's okay to not understand. It's our problem that you didn't understand. So within the first hour, we had this, it was like a journey from Cornwall to Exeter. Every 5 minutes, the train stops. It was just like that. And it was getting really frustrating. But we had to change our methods. We had to relearn our words, because people, when empowered, were saying, no, we don't understand. What do you mean? What is that? What you're using some technical word. You're using this thing, not even technical. So empower people. They will ask you back. We will rephrase. Was it Einstein who said it, or at least it's credited to Einstein? Anything good is credited to Einstein. That if you can't make it simple enough for a 6-year-old, then you can't get it across. But it's the same logic. You have to get it in there. And we're not talking atomic physics here. We're talking about basic things which will be done or medication which will be given to individuals about their bodies, then those with moderate to profound, of course, they can't participate. No use writing it in big black letters to say this is what's going to happen. You have to bring their families and care providers in. Where there is no representation, bring legal representation through IMCA, etc., and participatory representation. Now, what we have to be very clear about is that we're not going to be sitting there and agreeing to what they want. That's not what this is about. We will have unconditional positive regard for their feedback, but their feedback has to be structured within boundaries. We have to challenge them. It's not that, well, what do you think? Should there be something here and this thing and they say that and that's gospel truth? No, it doesn't work that way. You have to push back. You have to ask. So you want that happening. How will it happen? Why do you think it will happen? And say we don't have the money to make it happen. What is the compromise? What are the red lines? And these are, I can talk here freely about red lines and compromises, unconditional positive regard, but imagine the effort that it would take. I mean, when recently I did a co-production workshop, I came back at 3 o'clock and was so tired I slept for 2 hours. It's that strain's there. And we have to take that strain because also we have to transfer the fact that they own it, that they are representatives of a community, which will then have to own the final product in which, so they have skin in the game, basically. And they do. So that's the best part about it. I mean, one of the things which I would say is that even today, one of the patients who I visit in a home, we give certificates for people who have participated. 15 years on, in his room, he has put that certificate is still there that he participated in actually coming together. I had a person with Downs who was in a phase 2 study for a molecule around cognition, who went to Barcelona to give a talk about his experience.
Oh, amazing.
That I feel is impairment. So.
Wow.
It's so lovely.
It's funny because you're right. In almost every facet of life, if you're asked the question, you would just say, I want more. And that's not very helpful for everyone. So actually you need to sort of justify why you want more. And also if I'm justifying why I want more, it gives me more sort of buy into the situation. And then you've got that kind of engagement, like you say. So yeah, I can really understand that. Naomi, this is obviously your bread and butter. You do this all day long in regards to the sort of patient communication. What sort of techniques do you use or ways to do things, and how do you ensure that information and support is accessible to all the patients?
I think it's just important to not think one size fits all, and that we're tailoring the communications appropriately and really understanding the patient community needs. I think it's really important to listen and actively listen to what they need, and then acknowledging what the feedback has been and where their insights have been changed and what the impact it has been, and then acknowledging that. And when there's publications for, say, results in clinical trials, and that these patient groups are acknowledged, I think that's really important. We've definitely seen that with our clients and pharma companies that we've been working with, which is great. And just ensuring that every step of the way that the communication is clear and it's transparent and it's consistent. It's not a one-off. Early's great, but it should be early, consistent, early, often, and transparent, we often say, because it's ensuring that two-way relationship is always open, and that we have regular calls with these patient groups, and so that we're checking in how the clinical trial is impacting these patients and families, and even to the small of, when the notifications are sent out to when they're taking medications or when they're having seizures, and filling out the questionnaires. Are they at the right time? Can they be changed? And they often have been, and they have not been set up appropriately. And what notifications might be appropriate for one family isn't another. And how long a questionnaire is appropriate for, say, one caregiver, but isn't for another, and want to break up that questionnaire. And some of these data collection platforms are really complex, and some caregivers and patients are used to using smartphones and tablets, and some really aren't, and they want to have a paper form, and they're old school, and there should be that option, I feel. And it's just, again, tailoring it to the patient community. we've had lots of protocols that have been completely ripped apart and had to change, but companies have spent so much time and money, having to go back and change them and make sure that they're fit for purpose. And like where it was saying about, testing in different areas, and say like, you'd want to ensure that this clinical trial is fit for purpose and not just say ask one family. I think it's asking multiple and getting their input right from the start, and relaying back what you've heard, because I think there can be a lot of miscommunication. So I think it's really important to kind of say back what you've heard to the patient community and what you're taking on board, and acknowledge that. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, sort of repeating back what
you've
understood.
One quick thing, if I can jump in, Matt. I think, Naomi, you phrased it very well, that about one fit doesn't fit everyone.
No.
And I had this, and every time I do co-production and things, I learn a lot, I think, more than this thing. There's a learning journey. And more recently, we were doing this co-production with some 20 to 30-year-olds, 20 to 25-year-olds with mild ID, talking about certain interventions, etc. So we had all our sort of flip charts and this thing and all that to go through. Basically, one of the guys said, "Isn't there a website?" And we were taken aback. And I had this sort of 60-year-old neurologist next to me. And then we gave the website. They quickly went on that. All of them, there were 4 of them, and all of them went on that. Tuck, tuck, tuck. They're playing with their mobile phones and getting on there and seeing things. The neurologist turns to me and says, "Are you sure they got learning disability?" It's just that compared to their age group, it's the same. Like my son, if I give him my mobile phone, that's it. I won't see it. It's gone somewhere into this thing. And they are young. They have the same technologies. They're a bit slower than their peers. But why should we presume that we look at them as our peers? That's where I think there is the challenge, because it's a generational gap. Our mindset, we are pigeonholing them through our mindset instead of allowing them. And I learned that day. It was actually some co-production around constipation and issues around that, and it was brilliant. I mean, I thought, my God, and I came out very humbled.
Well, it's asking the patient group or patient community what best communication they want, and my 5-year-old can work the internet probably better than me, but it just depends. I think we've co-created websites with different patient communities, and again shared websites for clinical trial recruitment on their patient advocacy group websites, and you can look at the analytics and seeing who's looking at the inclusion criteria and where the trials are, and all that kind of insights that's shared in one place, and it was good for some groups, it's not for others. But I think it's just, again, going from the start of the design of the trial and the engagement, what's the strategy here, what's the communication plan, what works for everybody, and getting everyone on the same page so everyone's aligned before they start.
Yes,
you're very right. Yeah. I mean, one of the big things which we always face is the easy cop-out. Well, it's too difficult to include them, or they can't participate. And I find that pretty ridiculous, that we don't try enough to include people enough. And as you rightly said, there are so many ways and means in which we can put in the effort to justify. And we have to be as inclusive as possible. Of course, sometimes you have to exclude and you have to do things, but I think meaningful inclusion is essential, especially given so many ways now in which to communicate and to sort of build it. And we should be innovative in taking consent, like making it like a game, where the game itself will lead to consenting. So there's so many things, I think, which could pay dividends in this population. So.
I completely agree with that. Like everything you two have both said, you probably saw it, it's making me smile a lot. There are so many simple things that aren't hard, changes that we can make to include other people. For instance, I actually noted a couple of things down. So for instance, there was this talk I was doing, and I had to go and go and interview all these other people and stuff, but I needed to have arrived a day earlier or I would have a seizure, right? I didn't think about it properly that time, and I ended up having a seizure, which kind of messed it up a bit and made me less effective. And so simple things like having people communicate maybe remotely or maybe just travel to where it is a day earlier. That's simple. You can do that for people, then they're more included actually in this work. And another person I've worked with, this was such a simple thing. She was knackered as a result of mainly her drugs, but she said, I just can't do mornings. I'm much more productive like mid-afternoon. And we said, that's absolutely fine with us. Okay, why haven't we even thought about that? And then everyone was much more with it. It was buzzing more, and that person wasn't feeling rough. Another example, I think, and I haven't seen this happen, but I would love for it to happen, maybe you guys have, is I feel that in research, we need more translators, because we are very multinational, like country, well, world really, like especially in cities. And I feel that we're really missing out on the knowledge of people who, you know, don't speak the local language. That would be great to get them involved. And I think it's also okay sometimes to say, actually, this patient involved is rubbish. Like, you've given them a fair chance, but they're not made for this. And a way that we can try and prevent that is getting the right people involved. In my experience, some people, not many at all, but some people, because they haven't been sourced well, will see patient involvement as an opportunity to moan. It's not for that, you know, so we have to get the right people in. And I'm not saying excluding people just because they're unhappy. We can help find them another place to moan and get support. It's not discarding them, but this is a professional environment for us. We make accommodations for everybody to a degree, but they are our professionals, and we pay, like you were saying, Naomi, we have to pay them the same. So I think it's really important to treat them in a professional manner. And I don't know why you made me think of this also, but so I'm very hypermobile, right? This is going to sound random, but very hypermobile. And I went to the GP. This was near the beginning when it was really starting to hurt. And she's like, why don't you have like shorter steps? Why don't you stop extending? Why don't you have such... why are your paces so long? Don't swing your leg out of its socket practically. And sometimes there are simple, tiny little things like that the patients and families don't know about, the changes you can make that will significantly improve their quality of life, such as reduce pain. And it doesn't always have to be drugs, you know, and things like this can be identified in patient groups and patient involvement. Sometimes it's the simplest things that can make the biggest difference.
It's incredible points you made there. I mean, one sort of question that came to mind when you were saying that was, that's before you had the sort of patient advocacy part to your career. Let's say you were a patient, and how was that affected in that way? How different was it, or how difficult was it for you to find the information back then, or how do you understand? It's like things have moved on to a point. But a while ago is very difficult. What more do we need to do from a point of view of a patient to increase that kind of availability of data or support or material, etc.?
I think organisations need to go through patients who are already involved and get them to help promote it. When I first got started I mean, I didn't find one of the biggest epilepsy charities in the UK until I'd had surgery. And I'd had diagnosed with epilepsy over 20 years. I didn't know that existed. So I had no idea about the research going on out there. And that's despite being a utter science and medicine lover. I didn't know. And so I think patients and families are a brilliant opportunity for promoting this. You know, academia and medicine are still, unfortunately, we're getting better, but are quite segregated, siloed from the general population. And again, this is kind of why we see the same patients again and families again and again and again involved in research, because the other ones don't know about it. Another thing I've realized of late is that we often forget the patients who, for instance, in the case of epilepsy, might have completely controlled seizures. They're kind of just flowing along. They might have other symptoms of their disease, but they kind of get on with it. They would be amazing people to be involved, because they can be the most unhappy, they can be the most alone, but they're not seen as priority. What can we get those people in? As we need to get people who are non-verbal and have intellectual disability, why are we not reaching out to them? And I really think that we can do it through people like myself and other patients involved. We have some institutions which are totally cool. Okay, they haven't paid me for this, I promise, but like, for instance, Future Neuro, it like pimps itself out in a very cool way and reaches out in a friendly way to more patients, in my opinion. And I think we need to be more like that. We obviously have great people like Naomi in a pharma organization doing this. We need more people like you. I truly believe that, to speak the same language as people outside of academia and medicine. That's what we need. And, although bad news travels faster than good news, with this being good news, it will travel fast enough and we will get more people involved, I promise.
Fantastic. And Naomi, if you had a magic wand, what would be the sort of kind of number one thing that you would improve, or how would you improve patient engagement?
Oof, that's a hard question, Matt. I think it's just that there's more of it earlier. I think this is never too early and often too late. I will stand by that, and that every company that's working with these patient communities need to be doing more earlier, and listening, and taking action, because everyone will save time, resources, and money if that's done properly. And that we're accountable to that, and we're doing it rather than just saying it, and acknowledging that feedback and input from the patient communities. And that, at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, don't we? We all want more safe and effective medicines approved, and widely distributed globally to patients with an unmet need who need it.
Yeah, we're not just patients at all. Carol just said. Yeah, we're fellow Homo sapiens, and we have personalities. And I would also say, in terms of reaching out, it's one of the reasons I started my podcast, to bridge that gap between us all. We have patients and families and clinicians and researchers tuning in, like, who come to me and say, dude, that was cool, like, from all the whole human spectrum. And so it's kind of finding avenues like that. Why don't we have organizations doing easier things like Facebook Lives? We have heaps and heaps, as much as we moan about social media, we have heaps and heaps of people on the Facebook, on the Twitter or X, or LinkedIn, whatever. They are out there. Why aren't we doing that? It's not that hard. I know people tend to be more scared of it, in my opinion, than they should be. It's cool stuff, and we can do that together. And it's not very expensive. Like, if you have a few patient groups each year, those are just patient groups. They're totally involved, but they remain in that patient group. Nobody else hears about it. It's not promoted generally sufficiently, in my opinion, because other people don't hear about it. And we can change that.
Yeah, sure. And it's very much a communication piece, isn't it? Sort of getting the word out there and making people understand. And Rohit, you're on the other side of this, where you're doing this, sort of directly. I mean, what do you need to be improved to be able to do your sort of role in a more smooth manner?
Well, I think the first thing which we need to appreciate is it's not a simple matter. It's a complex matter. And even in this, it's almost like a motorway, 3-lane motorway. There are certain things which are going at much more better pace. If you think of, say, cancer care, from what I know, around 15 to 20% of people who have cancer are involved in research in the UK. But you think of something like mental health, that number comes down to something like 0.5%. Now, what is it that, of course, there are issues with regard to engagement, therapeutic engagement, recognition, but the main fundamental thing is self-belief and us conveying that need for research. If we don't believe that there is a need for research, and that's one of the biggest challenges which we are facing as a clinical community, is that if we don't actually fundamentally believe there is a need for research and improvement and precision medicine tools and better knowledge, and also holistic care, it sort of sits opposite precision medicine, but also personalized medicine and holistic care. They separate this thing, and it's about trying to give people some sort of control back to them. This is the other issue where I think there is a hierarchy. So when, say, Tori comes as a patient, I mean, I've been a patient at times, and at those moments, you fall into a line. You basically, even if the doctor comes and sits next to you and sort of says, I'm your friend, it's not your friend. There is a hierarchy. There's already a hierarchy. You can't change that hierarchy. The important thing is to recognize that hierarchy and to recognize, so move the unknown unknown to the known unknown and start working with that to say, okay, and that the problem is that if you start giving too much to the doctor, we feel pressurized that we need to come up with answers for you where there are none. So we have to be in a place where we can accept that there is a gap in research. There is something which we can blunder through. There is any question that we need to answer. And voila, you might be the right person who might want to participate in a study. And for that, the clinician needs to be aware of the studies which are going on. So it's sort of a pipeline here, which travels across multiple territories. So signpost them into those studies to get them recruited. So it's all about that, bringing that interface, that knowledge, and that complex circulation of knowledge into the mix. So, and I think if people are more likely to get involved in research if they have themselves or their family members seeing the affliction or seeing the condition. And yes, in a way, we need to tap into that to further science and give them those opportunities to believe in. Actually, intellectual disability is one of the best examples because we cocoon them. We put them in cotton wool and say, oh, they're very fragile. There's so much ethics. It's against Geneva Conventions or Vienna Conventions or whatever. No, they want to participate. We checked. Because without participation, yes, it's like crossing a road. Yeah, every time I cross a road, I might get knocked down.
Exactly.
But if I don't cross a road, I'm not going to get to the other side, am I? I'm going to be pretty miserable trying to shop with Sainsbury on the other side. I'll have to walk quite a bit to the Tesco then. So it's that. I think we have to take on board that risk. It's like car driving. Of course, if there were no cars, there would be no accidents. But then there would have been horses. But then get rid of all the horses. We could just be walking. Yes, you'll reduce the amount of accidents, but the amount of goodness that comes, we don't see the benefit. So we do really need to think about the benefits, not just the risks. And as a community, we are so risk averse, risk oriented that we end up putting more harm by being risk averse long term.
Do you know what? I actually had that conversation with a clinician recently. I was talking about a treatment for a mental illness, and I said, I know you're scared because I have an epilepsy. Like, I'm aware of that, but okay, I'll educate you if you like, but you also kind of need to grow a pair and realize that we're looking at the overall quality of life of an individual. You know, and I actually make concerted effort to, and I think this is important also in research, to not keep referring to patients as just patients. We are individuals. We have personalities. We are as valuable as the clinicians. And in my experience, what works best is not to have a hierarchy as such. We are all professionals. It's, you know, in certain areas, hence we should get paid as much, like Naomi was saying. And, you know, we should work together to change the world, not to I'm very, very anti the very old fashioned way of thinking like, well, you know, the doctor's always right, because that is totally not the case. And however, saying that also, and this is a challenge often in patient groups in my experience, is that sometimes patients are told, oh, you're the expert. Well, actually, especially when it comes to things like epilepsy, we're really not. Like, we are an expert in how we feel, an experience and an expert in what we remember we've gone through. But we're not clinicians and we're not researchers, and then you could say vice versa. So it's about that kind of working together and removing the unnecessary and in sometimes very old-fashioned snobby hierarchical structure. It's not necessary.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes that problem of a patient having just enough information to get themselves into trouble, but not enough information to know where to go next, which is where you want the doctor to come in or the healthcare professional to kind of teach and point in the correct direction.
And be open
Carol's
to contradiction.
in ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Carol.
Look, thank you very much for your time today. I mean, it's been a fantastic discussion. I've written down notes after notes after notes on this. But kind of a couple of the pieces, you know, Rohit mentioned very sort of poignantly the communication being one of the one of the most sort of necessary parts of this. But the sort of the research that goes around it, and then the holistic care that wraps around all of it, you know, to help the patient through, which fundamentally says to me that the patient needs to be there from the beginning. You can't have holistic care when they're just dropped in at the end and said, you know, take this 4 times a day, and then at the end of it they come, you know. So I completely understand it, and hopefully everyone's sort of understood what the point of this call was, or this conversation was, and hopefully we can have a future discussion about where to take this and how to engage the patients early and become sort of partners in this process, this healthcare process, and out the back of that will become the better outcomes that we're looking for from a medicine point of view, from a medical point of view. And I really think that it's an important conversation to have. So again, thank you everyone. For those interested in finding out more information, I'll send everyone that joined the call an email after this with the details of the speakers, because you'll probably want to speak to them again, I'm sure. Everyone's got so much to talk about, and also the knowledge is incredible. So, you know, look, once again, thank you for your engagement, and thank you to the panel speakers for joining.
Oh, thanks for having us. I hope everyone's found it insightful. But if anyone has any questions, let us know. Tori does an amazing podcast. You should listen to all of her past and future. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, let us know.
Yeah, lovely chatting with you all. I always feel energized after meeting all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, but send in any questions or comments or anything. It's been nice to hear any feedback. I always want to see people's faces, but thanks, Carol, for all of your engagement.
You can find us all on
Thanks,
social
Samantha.
media. We're all there, especially Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm totally there.
I'll make sure everyone's got the your links and in your your bio to send out. Yeah. So thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Tori, and thank you, Robbie. I very much appreciate the conversation.
Yes. See you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.